Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world and whenever you are watching this. Welcome back to the Peanut Gallery. So, after the other day's deep dive into the corruption case in Ukraine, something felt off. It didn't feel complete, it didn't feel finished. And I felt it warranted more digging, which is what I have done. So, over the weekend, I've been compiling a load of stuff. Written down notes, compiled reports, and yeah, that feeling was warranted and the digging was warranted. So grab a coffee, feet up, and relax, because this is probably going to be a long one. So how this started last week, the Ukrainian anti-corruption authorities NABU and SAPO exposed a sprawling criminal enterprise operating at the highest echelons of Ukraine's political, judicial and business sectors. Through two intertwined operations, Operation Themis, which focused on property theft and corporate raiding, and Operation Forrest Gump, which focused on money laundering, investigators uncovered a network that manipulated state registries, bribed judges, and laundered nearly 950 million hryvnias, or in the region of $21.4 million in corporate rights and real estate. The fallout has reached into President Volodymyr Zelenskys' immediate inner circles and triggering emergency dismissals and high-profile arrests. So, Operation Themis, it only recently came out over the weekend that this was going on alongside Operation Forrest Gump. It focused on the hostile illegal acquisition of premium corporate right and physical real estate. The group targeted three major tranches of assets. There was a corporate raid in autumn of 25. The syndicate successfully seized an enterprise valued at 248 million hryvnias, or in the region of $5.56 million, instantly transferring ownership to nominal frontmen, who were later discovered to be employed as security guards for one of the co-organisers. There was the Kiev real estate clustered targets in May 26. The group attempted to illegally absorb various properties across Kiev, valued at 270 million hryvnias, or in the region of $4.64 million. The grand prize, so the ultimate goal of the enterprise, was a hostile takeover of a business entity to control a premium real estate site in central Kiev, valued at over 500 million hryvnias, or thereabouts in the region of $11.2 million. Operation Forrest Gump, this was a money laundering pipeline. Once the assets were stripped, the syndicate needed to inject liquidity back into the legal system to protect their network. The group funneled 150 million hryvnias, or thereabouts in the region of $3.3 million, in illicit cash through a web of shell corporations. The funds were placed into the state-owned Bank to disguise their origin. The laundered cash was used to post court bail for Minister Herman Halushenko, who was jailed under a separate $100 million Midas nuclear energy graft scandal, which I will go into in a bit more detail, and the fallout from that. So yeah, that's a quick update on where we are. So this all connects into an ongoing saga, into a point where Zelensky actually tried to curb the powers of the independent investigation committees. So this is where it gets very interesting, and it's been quietly put aside while Zelensky still remains a poster boy of being the cherub that can do no wrong in Europe. So, again, compiled reports, done research over the weekend, so this is what I've compiled. So, between August 24 and August 26, the Ukraine witnessed its largest political institutional crisis since the 2022 invasion. a covert anti-corruption probe into the state nuclear energy operator, and I'm sorry if I pronounce this wrong, but I'm pronouncing it as I say it, Energoatom, or Operation Midas as it was known, triggered an aggressive legislative attempt by President Volodymyr Zelensky's administration to strip independence from the nation's key anti-graft watchdogs. Driven by Western pressure and public backlash, the ensuing political battle ultimately exposed a massive criminal ring directly linked to the presidential administration. So in August 24, the National Anti-Corruption Bureau, or NABU, and the Specialised Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office, SAPO, launched a secret investigation codenamed Operation Midas. So what happened here was for 15 months, detectives accumulated over 1,000 hours of wiretaps, intercepted financial logs, and tracking physical shipments of cash across European borders. Sometimes this cash was actually in bags in the boots of cars. So all the while this was secret investigation, no one knew a thing. Then, out of nowhere, in July 25, the covert probe approaches Zelensky's inner circle. The president signs Law 12414, subordinating NABU and SAPO to the politically appointed Prosecutor General. Please bear in mind, the Prosecutor General is employed by Zelensky. He's elected by Zelensky, and given Zelensky has a sizable majority in the Ukrainian parliament, whoever he selects, they come into power rather smoothly. So, 22nd of July, Zelensky signs the order subordinating NABU and SAPO to the Prosecutor General. By the 31st of July, Zelensky backtracks and makes a complete U-turn. This is due mostly to massive domestic protests and warnings from the G7 and EU that basically they'll freeze military aid and assistance. So Zelensky then U-turns and drops a bill. So this is where it gets even more interesting, and anti-corruption watchdogs in that time said, is this Zelensky trying to do a cover-up? 10th of November 25, they're basically vindicated. Operation Midas goes public. NABU and SAPO execute 70 simultaneous raids on Energoatom headquarters and private residences, making immediate high-profile arrests. In February 26, former Energy Minister Herman Halushenko is arrested on a train bound for Warsaw while attempting to flee the country. May 26, corruption charges are brought against influential Presidential Chief of Staff Andriy Yermak, forcing his immediate resignation. And just last week, the spin-off money laundering investigation exposed the illicit ring trying to raise bail for Halushenko, and Deputy Chief of Staff Irina Mudra got ousted. So, what actually happened? So, let me get my other notes. So, I'm going into this into a bit more detail. So, on the 22nd of July 25, the Ukraine entered a severe rule of law crisis when Zelensky signed Law 12414. The legislation included late-stage amendments that effectively dismantled the operational autonomy of the National Anti-Corruption Bureau, NABU, and Specialised Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office, SAPO, by legally subordinating these independent watchdog agencies to the politically appointed Prosecutor General. The law basically established structural mechanisms to suppress corruption investigations. The executive branch, they defended the changes as essential wartime security. they were saying because the agencies were independent of the executive branch, that it was more prone to Russian moles and Russian integration. Anti-corruption watchdogs described it as a deliberate kill switch and a preemptive cover-up. The subsequent exposure of the $100 million Operation Midas scandal, which dismantled the massive corruption ring inside Energoatom and led to criminal charges against the Chief of Staff Andrei Yermak and other top aides, heavily validated the critics' claims that the legislation was a preemptive attempt to shield Zelensky's inner circle from exposure. So, the institutional independence and the role of the Prosecutor General, it was oil and water, basically. Under the Ukraine's post-2014 Western backed legal architecture, an ABU and SAPO were designed to operate entirely outside of the standard political hierarchy. The design allowed them basically to investigate any high-ranking officials without executive interference. Law number 12414 would have basically killed that dead. So, the office of Prosecutor General is constitutionally distinct. It is practically dependent on the executive branch through two main vulnerabilities. So, the appointment of power, the president directly nominates the Prosecutor General. Zelenskys' party, the Servant of the People, has a parliamentary majority, so basically Zelensky can ensure the confirmation of a loyal ally. So the president retains a unilateral authority to suspend or dismiss the Prosecutor General at discretion. Basically, if the Prosecutor General didn't dance to Zelensky's tune, Zelensky could get rid of him. Any powers granted to the Prosecutor General function as an indirect extension of the office of the President. So, the choke points of this law, the clause stripped the head of SAPO of the power to independently indict top-tier Category A public officials. It mandated that only the Prosecutor General could sign the formal notice of suspicion. So in the Ukraine constitution, you cannot be indicted or formally named as a suspect without being served a written notice of suspicion. So basically, this mechanism that stripped the head of SAPO from doing this could basically make an investigation go away because only the Prosecutor General could sign it. And if the president said, do not give this person this notice, then they're basically not a suspect in the investigation. The operational impact, if NABU investigators uncovered irrefutable evidence of a multi-million-dollar bribe taken by a cabinet minister or presidential advisor, the only person that could move that case forward would be the Prosecutor General, and only with written approval. So, you can see where that's going. If they don't get the written approval, they can't move the case forward, it's dead in the water. So, the jurisdictional transfer clause. The legislation removed SAPO's exclusive right to resolve jurisdictional boundaries and passed authority to settle jurisdictional disputes to the Prosecutor General. So what this did was created a loophole to derail active cases. So if NABU targeted a powerful political figure, the Prosecutor General could declare a jurisdictional conflict and legally reassign the files to the State Bureau of Investigation or the Security Service of Ukraine, agencies which are under much tighter executive influence, and the case could then quietly be stalled. One of the biggest ones was the unilateral case closure clause. So the amendment granted the Prosecutor General the overriding legal authority to arbitrarily close any criminal case involving top officials independent of Sapo's leadership. So this was basically a kill switch. This law allowed the Prosecutor General to access any and all highly confidential active files, demand any case materials from NABU, and basically he could terminate any investigation before it could ever be reviewed by the High Corruption Court. Again, the case would be dead in the water. So there was also a plea agreement clause. The authority went to the Prosecutor General to finalise plea agreements with suspects in high-profile corruption cases. This enabled the executive branch to basically do dodgy backroom deals for immunity. A corrupt official facing trial could bypass independent anti-graft prosecutors completely and go straight to the Prosecutor General, negotiate a much more lenient closed-door backroom deal, which could then shield other high-ranking accomplices. So, the motives: political cover-up or national security. The introduction of the clauses created a fierce debate on both sides. Activists and opposition figures argued that the administration enacted Law Number 12414 was basically a preemptive cover-up. When Operation Midas was made public, the $100 million bribery ring operating out of Energoatom, this basically vindicated all debates that it was a preemptive cover-up and that he was trying to basically strip NABU and SAPO of their powers, especially when Zelenskys' chief of staff was one of the ones implicated and arrested. And then now his chief of staff, Irina Mudra, and his close friends and former business associates. So Zelensky made a vigorous case that he wasn't being corrupt. The administration maintained that autonomous law enforcement bodies created national security vulnerabilities during an existential war. They asserted that independent agencies were vulnerable to penetration by Russian intelligence moles, making centralised oversights by the Prosecutor General a vital safeguard for state secrets. Personally, I don't buy Zelensky's argument. I think he was using this to try and kill any cases that were coming to his inner circle completely stone dead. I think somebody tipped him the wink that the heat was getting close and it was going to get even closer still, and he did what he could to kill the case stone dead, but didn't grant or think about the massive civil protests and the fact that his military aid would be cut if he went ahead with the bill. So he did fast-track a repeal bill on the 31st of July, which killed the law stone dead. However, one of the things that was implemented is that operatives now have to have much more rigorous vetting and take a lie detector test every 2 years to prevent Russian influence. So, one of the other things I dug into was, given that the investigations are now basically outside his office, you know, why isn't Zelensky getting investigated himself? Because, I'm sorry, but if your deputy chief of staff is money laundering and you don't know, given there's only his deputy chief of staff, her boss, and then Zelensky, he is either blissfully unaware and a bit of an idiot, or he's directly involved. So, why isn't Zelensky getting investigated as well? This is where it gets quite interesting. So, there's an article in the Constitution of Ukraine under Article 105. This means the president possesses absolute, comprehensive executive immunity that insulates him from any and all criminal, civil, and administrative liabilities whilst in office. While NABU and SAPO are deeply institutionally autonomous, they are legally blocked from taking direct action against Zelensky. What murks the water even more is that national elections are constitutionally suspended under martial law. So basically, Zelensky's immunity is locked in place for the foreseeable future until the war with Russia is ended. So, what are the boundaries of Article 105? So, it's one of the most, if not the most, sweeping executive protections in all of Europe. Unlike parliamentary immunity, which Zelensky campaigned to abolish and was successful in 2019, his immunity protections remained untouched to ensure executive stability. So, criminal protections. Law enforcement cannot issue a formal notice of suspicion to a sitting president. Without this notice, an individual cannot be formally named as a criminal suspect. The judiciary lacks the legal authority to sign warrants authorising the arrest, detention and physical search or adversarial interrogation of Zelensky, and the president is entirely shielded from personal civil lawsuits and financial damages while holding office. Also, it extends beyond his physical body and encompasses his immediate personal workspace and sphere of control. So, law enforcement agents executing a valid search warrant within the president's office are legally forbidden from entering the president's personal suite, desk or safes. The warrants cannot target the president's personal electronic devices, so your laptop, mobile phones, etc., or his personal profiles on digital networks. Remote interception, wiretapping, or the deployment of state spyware against presidential devices is absolutely strictly prohibited. Even if Zelensky's office door was wide open, there was incriminating paperwork and an open laptop on his desk with a big neon sign saying, "Here is the evidence," the agents couldn't even go into his office. They are absolutely forbidden from crossing that threshold. So even if they thought, fuck it, I'll do it anyway, it would be highly illegal. They would be fired immediately and actually be in court for violation of the Constitution. So, even if there was irrefutable evidence and this evidence was gotten a hold of, any evidence obtained via a constitutional violation, which if it belonged to the president would be permanently deemed inadmissible in a court of law. Basically, if they gathered the evidence from his desk, his device, or from him in person, that material is legally ruined, even if it was irrefutable proof that he'd been doing wrong. Investigators who gathered the evidence would face immediate dismissal and a criminal prosecution for abuse of authority. So, interesting. The ongoing Midas and Forrest Gump by the NABU and SAPO, they can't target him at all. So, given they are aggressively targeting his inner circle, my guess would be that they are trying to isolate him and they are building a file, because even if evidence is found, they can't do anything with it. What would happen to that evidence is it would be transferred to a secure location, it would be put on file, and literally the minute his presidency ends, that file is opened and he is treated as a normal citizen and will be indicted and whatever else comes with it. So yeah, like I said, the aggressively targeted his inner circle, his chief of staff, his deputy chief of staff, the logging evidence all the time of his close associates. So basically, by documenting the crimes of his closest confidants, watchdogs compile an unsealed, ready-to-go criminal archive. The moment he leaves his office and his immunity expires, the files can be redirected towards him and basically see where it goes from there. So, can Zelensky actually be charged while as president? There is only one official political way, and that is impeachment. But it is not as straightforward as that, because it is designed to be highly complex and it is basically set up to fail immediately. So, how do we go about impeaching him? So, the process cannot be started by the law enforcement agencies, not even SAPO or NABU or the public. It must begin entirely within the Verkhovna Rada, which is Ukraine's parliament. So, the legal grounds is the impeachment can only be initiated if the president is accused of high treason or another severe crime. A constitutional majority of Verkhovna Rada, at least 226 members of parliament, must sign and vote in favour of a draft resolution to initiate the impeachment procedure. That is 226 members just to say we agree and to get the impeachment procedure started and off the ground. Next, we have the creation of a special investigative commission. So, once the initiation vote passes, bear in mind, Zelensky's Servant of the People Party holds a pretty sizable majority in Parliament, so chances are it probably wouldn't even get off the ground. Happen if it did, they would have to create a special investigative commission. So what happens? The Parliament forms this commission, which includes a special prosecutor, special investigators, and MPs chosen proportionally from political factions. The commission is granted law enforcement style powers to investigate the allegations, so they interview witnesses, review classified state secrets, demand any physical evidence, and audit any relevant document. After concluding the investigation, the commission drafts a formal report containing the conclusions and recommendations on whether the crime was committed. Third stage. The findings are then brought back to the floor of the General Parliament. The Special Commission presents its conclusion directly to the MPs during a parliamentary session. If the report confirms wrongdoing, Parliament votes on whether to adopt the charges against the President. This requires a supermajority of at least 300 MPs, which is 2/3 of the constitutional composition. Again, Zelensky's Servant of the People Party holds overall majority. Even getting to the third stage is pretty low, and getting 300 MPs to vote for these charges is even slimmer. If by some miracle it gets past that point, it goes to judicial review and validation. So we now have two separate high courts that come into the mix. The Constitutional Court, what this does, the report goes there and they review the case and go through it with a fine-tooth comb to see that it was strictly following constitutional law. If at any point during a Constitutional Court investigation into whether the law was followed, even the slightest point that veered away from the strict constitutional law, the impeachment procedure is dead in the water, done, finished, nothing, nada. It cannot be restarted, and Parliament has to issue the President a formal apology. If it gets past the Constitutional Court, it then goes to the Supreme Court. The court then reviews the actual evidence collected and officially certified that the acts committed by the President indeed bear the legal characteristics of high treason or another severe crime. Again, if the Supreme Court deems that it doesn't bear the legal characteristics of either one of them 2 points, impeachment, dead, done, nothing, nada, and the president still remains in office and gets a formal apology. If by some absolute miracle the planets have aligned, there's a blue moon, pigs are flying, it gets to the final removal vote, what happens there? If both courts validate the proceedings and the evidence, the case returns to Parliament for the final decision. The courts do not have the final say-so, it is Parliament. To officially remove the President from office, the Verkhovna Rada must pass the final resolution. Guess how much it requires? Wrong. It requires 75% of the constitutional membership of Parliament. This is typically, or historically, 338 out of 450 MPs. Again, I must insist that given Zelenskys' party holds the majority of Parliament, passing the fifth and final vote is slim to none. The fact that it even get the 5 to stage 5 of the final removal vote, it probably wouldn't even get off the ground. However, if the planets aligned, if pigs flew, if unicorns were reincarnated, and then some miracle happened that all of this passed and the final removal vote met the majority that was needed, what would happen? So, at that moment, Zelensky would be out of office and his absolute presidential immunity instantly expires. The individual reverts to the status of an ordinary citizen, allowing law enforcement like NABU, SAPO, or state prosecutors to immediately serve them with a formal written notice of suspicion and initiate criminal prosecution in regular court. So, a very interesting look into what is going on. My own thoughts, for what is worth, and this is my own thought, I think Zelensky is up to his neck in it. Given that he tried to strip the autonomy from NABU and SAPO, absolutely reeks of a preemptive cover-up. I think somebody in the know tipped Zelensky the wink that the heat was coming and it was going to get very close and very hot. And he tried to basically kill the case stone dead until his population decided to go, hey, screw this. And his Western allies said, if you go ahead with this law, your military aid, your financial aid is cut off and you're on your own. So, yeah. Basically, I think Zelensky is up to his neck in it, and in a weird, twisted way, it'd probably be in his best interest to keep this war going on for as long as possible, because while he is in power, he is immune and can't have any fingers pointed at him. And given that martial law dictates that elections are pretty much banned until peace is achieved, his presidency is going to last for the foreseeable future. So, there you have it. The poster boy of Europe, of the little cherub that can't do any wrong. Personally, I think it is smashed to bits, and those that are absolutely vehemently adamant that Zelensky is the leader of choice and the ideal picture of a true, honest leader, I think they're kidding themselves. I think he's up to his neck in corruption. I think the whole blissfully unaware head in the sand act, that he would have no idea that this was going on. Bluntly, I think it is a crock of shit, and it wouldn't surprise me if he was directly involved. So with that, yeah, that's another deep dive done. See you in the next one, and goodbye.